The sun had fallen behind the walls of Jerusalem, leaving the city wrapped in an uneasy silence. The air still carried the echoes of the crowd that had screamed hours earlier, "Crucify him!" Now the same streets stood empty. Dust blew through narrow alleys where no one dared to walk. Inside a small, dimly lit room, 11 men sat together, their faces pale, their hearts broken. These were the ones who had followed him, the men who had walked on water, fed thousands, seen the blind see and the dead rise. But now he was gone. The cross still stood outside the city, dark against the crimson sky, and none of them could forget it. Peter sat near the door, his hands trembling. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard his own voice again. "I do not know the man." Those words tore him apart. John sat in silence, his eyes empty, replaying the moment he had watched Jesus breathe his last breath. No one spoke. Even the wind outside seemed afraid to whisper. The world that had once felt alive under his words now felt hollow, abandoned, dead. Thomas finally broke the silence. "It's over," he said, his voice shaking. "We thought he would save us. But he's gone." No one answered. Some turned away. Others looked down. Hope had left them as quietly as the night had come. Only Mary, sitting in the corner, wiped her tears and whispered, "He said this would happen. But he also said he would return." Her voice was soft, yet it carried something that none of them had left: faith. Outside, thunder rolled across the distance, though there were no clouds. The earth itself seemed restless. As the hours passed, one by one, the disciples began to drift into uneasy sleep, but Peter remained awake. He couldn't forget the moment their eyes had met. Jesus looking at him as the rooster crowed. That look still burned in his soul. He wanted to run, to shout, to undo it all, but there was nowhere to go. The streets were filled with Roman soldiers, and anyone who spoke his name was being hunted. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. The sound froze everyone. No one moved. The knock came again. Slow, steady, dangerous. Peter looked at John. "Don't open it," someone whispered. "They've found us." The room filled with fear. The small oil lamp flickered as if the air itself had turned cold. Then, from the other side of the door, a voice whispered, "Please, let me in." It was weak, almost broken, but familiar. Peter rushed forward, pulled the door open, and there stood a man wrapped in dust and tears. It was one of their own, a messenger from the tomb. "They're guarding it," he gasped. "They've sealed it with stone and soldiers." But something strange happened. There was light. The ground shook. The guards ran. "The stone." He stopped, trembling. "The stone has been moved." Every face in the room lifted. For the first time since the cross, there was movement in their hearts. Not hope yet, but confusion mixed with wonder. Peter grabbed the man's shoulders. "Moved? What do you mean moved?" The messenger nodded, his eyes wide with fear. "I don't know, but the tomb is open." Silence filled the room again, heavy and electric. Could it be? Was it possible? Could the words he spoke, the ones they had barely understood, be real? John stood up first. "If there is even a chance," he said, "we have to see." Peter hesitated. Fear and hope battled inside him. He remembered Jesus' words, "After 3 days, I will rise." The memory cut through his doubt like a blade. He turned toward the door. "Then we go before the soldiers return." As they stepped into the cold night, the city of Jerusalem slept under uneasy peace. No one knew that history was about to change again. Their footsteps echoed through the empty streets, hearts pounding, breath sharp in the cold air. Ahead, beyond the olive trees, the tomb waited silent, sealed, or maybe not. The world had thought the story was over, but something unseen was stirring in the darkness. And soon, the silence after the cross would be broken forever. The night wind carried a chill that seemed to pierce through Peter's bones as he and John moved through the empty streets. The city was silent, but every shadow felt like a soldier watching. Behind them, the other disciples stayed hidden. Only 2 had the courage to go. They reached the edge of the garden. where the tomb waited, sealed by the Romans, guarded by silence and fear. The olive trees swayed in the dark, whispering secrets only heaven could hear. When Peter saw the tomb, his steps slowed. His heart pounded like thunder. The stone that had sealed it was gone, rolled aside. The opening yawned like a wound in the earth. No guards, no torches, just the echo of their own breathing. John looked at him, his eyes wide. "Go," he whispered. Peter stepped forward, his feet trembling on the ground that still smelled of death. He pushed aside the cloth at the entrance and went in. The air inside was cold, still, empty. Only linen lay where the body should have been, folded, clean, untouched. The tomb was silent, but something inside it felt alive. Peter's knees gave way. He fell to the ground, his mind spinning. Gone. The body was gone. For a moment, he thought maybe the Romans had taken him. Maybe the priests had done something cruel again. But then he saw the way the burial cloths were folded, peacefully, carefully, as if done by a hand that was not afraid. He felt something stir deep inside him, something he thought he had lost forever. Hope. He stumbled outside, gasping for air. John followed, his face pale in the dawn light. "He's not there," Peter whispered, voice cracking. "He's not there." They ran back through the streets, hearts racing, not knowing whether to weep or laugh. When they reached the others, everyone rose to their feet. "What did you see?" Thomas demanded. "Tell us." Peter could barely speak. "The tomb," he said, breathless. "It's empty." The room filled with noise, disbelief, tears, and confusion. But before they could decide what to do, there was another knock at the door. This time, no one moved in fear. Slowly, John opened it, and there stood Mary Magdalene, her face streaked with tears, her eyes blazing with something between terror and wonder. "I saw him," she whispered. The room fell silent. "I saw the Lord." For a moment, no one breathed. Peter stared at her, trying to understand. "What do you mean you saw him?" he asked. Mary stepped forward, her voice trembling but strong. "He spoke to me. He called my name. He's alive." The words struck them like lightning. Alive. Could it be true? Could the impossible have happened? Peter's heart ignited. The guilt that had chained him for days began to burn away. He remembered how he had denied him, how he had wept bitterly in the dark. But now there was still time. He could see him again. He could ask forgiveness. He could finish what had begun. That night, Peter didn't sleep. He walked alone through the alleys, staring at the stars. He whispered, "If you're out there, I will not run again." In that silent prayer, his heart changed. The man who had once feared the voice of a servant girl now carried the fire of faith inside him. Days passed. The city buzzed with rumors. Some said his followers had stolen the body. Others whispered that strange lights were seen near the tomb. But Peter knew something no rumor could touch. He had seen the empty place where death had failed. When the risen Lord finally appeared before them, Peter fell to his knees, tears flooding his face. Jesus looked at him, and in that single gaze, all his guilt melted away. "Feed my sheep," he said softly. It was not a command, it was a calling. Years later, Peter would stand before crowds in Jerusalem, his voice no longer trembling but roaring like thunder. He would speak not of fear, but of life, of a tomb that could not hold the Son of God. Thousands would listen, and thousands would believe. But with faith came danger. Rome watched, the priests whispered, and soon, the same empire that had crucified his Lord turned its eyes toward him. The fire of Peter's heart did not fade. When they came to arrest him, he didn't hide. When they threatened his life, he didn't beg. He only asked one thing: "If I must die as he did, then let it be upside down, for I am not worthy to die as my Lord died." And as they raised the cross that would hold him, Peter looked toward the sky, remembering that empty tomb, and whispered, "Thank you for the fire you gave me." The days after the resurrection were filled with wonder, confusion, and whispers. Every disciple had seen him. Every voice spoke of light and peace, except one. Thomas had not been there when Jesus appeared. He had been wandering outside the city, trying to quiet his restless heart. When the others told him, "We have seen the Lord," he shook his head. His eyes were heavy, tired of fear, tired of false hope. "Unless I see the marks of the nails in his hands," he said quietly, "and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." The room fell silent. No one argued. They all knew Thomas, the man who needed proof, the one who questioned not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much. He had seen the cross with his own eyes. He had watched the sky darken, heard the cries of pain, seen blood and death. His heart had broken once. He couldn't let it break again over a dream. Days passed. The disciples stayed hidden, doors locked, still fearing the Roman guards. Then one evening, as the oil lamps flickered and the air turned heavy, something changed. Without sound, without movement, he was there. Jesus stood among them. No door had opened, no wind had stirred. Yet his presence filled the room like a storm of peace. The disciples fell to their knees, awestruck once again. Thomas froze. His heart stopped. The one he had doubted now stood before him, alive, radiant, calm. Jesus looked at him, not with anger, but with deep sadness and love. "Thomas," he said softly, "put your finger here. See my hands. Reach your hand and touch my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas stepped forward, tears rising in his eyes. His trembling hand touched the scar that no death could erase. Warm, real, alive. He fell to his knees and whispered, "My Lord and my God." Jesus smiled faintly. "Because you have seen me, you believe. Blessed are those who have not seen, and yet believe." That night, Thomas didn't sleep. He sat alone, thinking of every moment, every word, every miracle he had witnessed. The doubt that had ruled his heart was gone, replaced by something greater, conviction. The others spoke of staying in Jerusalem, but Thomas's heart burned to go farther. He wanted the whole world to know that faith was not a story. It was real. It was living. It had a name. Months turned into years. One by one, the disciples were scattered to different lands, carrying the message to places no one had ever heard of. And Thomas, guided by dreams and whispers he could not explain, began to travel east. Across deserts and seas, through storms and hunger, he carried the memory of that scarred hand and those words. "Blessed are those who have not seen." He reached the far lands of India, a place of temples, colors, and kings who worshipped many gods. They called him the stranger of light, for his eyes seemed to carry the glow of something holy. He healed the sick, spoke of love and forgiveness, and built small gatherings of believers in secret. His words were simple but powerful. "I have seen life conquer death." Many believed, but not everyone welcomed him. The priests of the old gods began to whisper to the rulers, saying the foreign man was turning hearts away from their traditions. "He brings a new god," they warned. "If he stays, our temples will fall." Soon Thomas was hunted, yet he did not run. When they came to capture him, he smiled calmly. "You can break the body," he said, "but not the truth." They dragged him outside the city to a lonely hill. The sun was burning red as they raised their spears. And as the first spear struck, he whispered one last prayer. Not for himself, but for the people he had taught. "Lord, into your hands I go again." But his story did not end there. Long after his death, people began to speak of strange lights appearing near his grave, and of a well where the water healed the sick. His name spread quietly through generations, carried by those who believed without seeing. The doubter had become the proof of faith itself. Years had passed since that night in Jerusalem when fear turned to faith. The disciples had carried the message of their risen Lord to every corner of the world, and one by one, they had paid the price. Peter's cross, Thomas's spear, Philip's blood in Greece. Each story ended in sacrifice. Only one remained. One man still lived to remember it all, John, the beloved disciple, the last witness. He had seen it all, the miracles, the betrayal, the empty tomb, the fire that fell upon them at Pentecost. Now he walked slowly through the narrow paths of Patmos, an old man with eyes that still burned like they could see heaven itself. The Roman Empire had exiled him here, far from his people, far from the churches he had built. But they could not silence his spirit. Alone on that island of stone and wind, he carried within him memories the world could never erase. The nights were long on Patmos. The sea roared endlessly, crashing against the rocks like the anger of a world that had rejected truth. John would sit outside his small cave, staring at the stars, remembering the face of his teacher. He had been young when he followed him, just a fisherman's son. But now his hands trembled with age. And yet, his heart still heard that voice. Follow me. Sometimes, in the stillness, he would whisper to the wind. They are all gone now, Lord. Every brother you gave me. I remain. Tell me why. But only the waves answered. The empire believed they had silenced the message by exiling him. But in that silence, something greater was waiting to speak. One night the island shook. The wind turned violent, and lightning split the sky. John awoke to a sound unlike anything he had ever heard. A voice, deep and thunderous, yet gentle like a father's call. It echoed through the cave, filling it with light. Write what you see, the voice said. What is now and what will come? John fell to the ground, shielding his face from the light that was brighter than the sun. He could not breathe, could not move. When he opened his eyes, he saw visions beyond anything his human mind could grasp. A throne surrounded by fire, angels crying, "Holy, holy, holy," and a world trembling before its creator. He saw war, famine, kings and nations rising and falling. He saw the end of time, and beyond it, a new beginning. His hands shook as he wrote, but he did not stop. For days, weeks, maybe months, he wrote everything the voice revealed. The book that would one day be called Revelation was born in that lonely cave, on a forgotten island, from the heart of the last disciple. When the vision ended, John fell silent. His body was weak, but his eyes were filled with light. The guards who watched him began to whisper. They said the old man talked to angels, that fire glowed from his cave at night. Some were afraid. Some began to believe. Years passed. The Roman emperor who had exiled him died, and John was finally allowed to leave Patmos. He returned to Ephesus, where people greeted him as the last voice of the men who had walked with Jesus. He could barely stand, but when he spoke, the crowds listened in tears. Children, he would say softly, love one another, for love is of God. That was his message. Not power, not revenge, not fear, but love. The same love that he had seen in the eyes of the man on the cross. The same love that had defeated death itself. And when the day finally came for him to leave this world, John asked only for silence. He lay down in the earth, eyes closed, a faint smile on his lips. The others had died with blood and pain. John left in peace, the last witness to the greatest story ever told. But some say that even after his burial, the ground above his tomb would tremble slightly, as if the earth itself could not forget him. Others claimed to see light escaping through the cracks of his resting place, like the glow of an eternal candle. The empire had silenced all the others, but not him. His words, written on that lonely island, would outlive kings and empires, and remind generations that faith cannot be exiled. Centuries had passed since the first 12 had walked the dusty roads of Galilee, yet their names were still whispered in every corner of the world. Peter the Rock, John the Beloved, Thomas the Wanderer. But among them were others, men whose stories the world had nearly forgotten. Their footsteps were covered by sand and time. Yet, if one listened closely, the wind still carried their voices, echoes of faith that refused to die. Bartholomew was one of them. The world called him a quiet man, but in his silence burned the courage of 1,000 storms. After the resurrection, when the others scattered, he went east, to the rough mountains of Armenia, a land of kings and idols. He spoke to people who had never heard of the Son of Man. They laughed at him at first. They called his faith foolish. But when a sick child was healed after his prayer, the laughter turned to fear, and then belief. For years he taught in secret caves, lighting small lamps where no temple would allow him to speak. But news of his miracles reached the king, who saw him as a threat. One night, soldiers came for him. They dragged him through the streets and gave him a choice: renounce the name of Jesus or die. Bartholomew looked to the sky and smiled. "You can take my skin," he said softly, "but not my soul." The dawn that followed was red, but his name lived on in the hearts of those he had healed. Far across the sea, another voice was rising. Philip, the thinker, the man who had once asked, "Show us the Father." He traveled to Greece, where the philosophers ruled every conversation. They mocked him, saying his God was too simple. But Philip did not argue. He only told stories, parables of love, mercy, and forgiveness. Slowly, the cold minds of scholars began to warm. Some said they saw light around him when he spoke. Others said he healed a dying woman just by touching her forehead. But Rome did not forgive such power. They crucified him upside down in Hierapolis. Witnesses said that as he hung, he looked at the sky and whispered, "Now I see the Father." Simon the Zealot's story was darker still. Once a fighter against Rome, he became a preacher of peace. He carried the message to Persia, a land that burned with war. Many there wanted nothing to do with him, but Simon's words were like water over stone, patient, strong. In time, hearts began to change. Yet the priests of fire grew angry. One night, they tied him between two trees and tore him apart. The last thing he said was a prayer for those who killed him. And then there was Jude Thaddeus, the man who once asked, "Lord, why do you reveal yourself to us and not to the world?" After the resurrection, he made it his mission to answer that question. He carried the message to Syria, healing the sick, comforting widows, and giving hope to slaves. When rulers demanded he stop, he said, "The truth cannot be chained." They silenced him with swords, but not before he whispered one last word: "Forgive." Years turned into centuries. Kingdoms rose and fell. The names of these men faded from stone and memory, but their stories never died. Hidden in old scrolls, carved in forgotten temples, their lives were waiting to be found again. One night, in the ruins of an ancient monastery, a young traveler sat by a campfire. He was a historian from far away, searching for evidence of the disciples who had vanished from the pages of history. The wind howled through broken walls as his candle flickered. He brushed the dust off a stone and found strange letters carved beneath, words that sent a chill down his spine. "To whoever finds this, know that we saw him again." His hands trembled. He ran his fingers across the stone, tracing the faded lines. Who wrote this? When? Was it a message from one of them, one of the forgotten ones? He dug deeper into the ruins and uncovered fragments of an ancient scroll sealed in clay. Inside were words that had not been read for nearly 2,000 years. They spoke of journeys, miracles, and endings that the world never knew. The traveler felt tears fill his eyes as he read the final line. "We were 12. We walked with him. We watched him rise. And though time buries our names, his light still walks among the living." He looked up at the night sky, stars shining through the cracks of the ruins. Somewhere out there, the same stars that watched over the 12 still burned. And maybe, he thought, their light, like the faith they carried, would never fade. The world had changed. Empires that once ruled with iron and blood had turned to dust, their monuments swallowed by time. Yet, in quiet corners of the earth, the story of 12 men still lived, whispered in prayers, sung in hymns, and carried by hearts that had never seen their faces. The fishermen, the wanderers, the doubters, the dreamers. They were gone, but their fire still burned. In a small village church built of stone and light, a boy sat listening to the old preacher's words. The preacher spoke of Jesus and his 12 disciples, men who had walked with him, eaten with him, suffered for him. But when the boy asked, "Where are they now?" the preacher smiled softly and said, "They are here." The boy frowned. "Here? But they're gone." The preacher pointed to the cross above the altar. "Their blood built this faith. Their courage filled it. Their love keeps it alive." Outside, the world was loud and cruel, but inside that church, time stood still. The candle flames flickered like 12 tiny stars, each representing one of them. Peter, who had once been afraid but died fearless. Thomas, who doubted but crossed oceans to tell the truth. John, who saw heaven itself. The forgotten ones, Bartholomew, Simon, Jude, Philip, who carried the message to places no one remembers. Together, they had changed the world. Their words had outlived swords. Their faith had outlasted kings. Across continents and centuries, their message spread, carried by people who would never know their faces. In the deserts of Egypt, monks carved prayers into cave walls, whispering the same name they had preached. In the snowy mountains of Europe, travelers carried wooden crosses tied with rope, remembering the man who once carried his own. In the jungles of faraway lands, believers risked their lives to read the same words those 12 had spoken in Galilee. And always there was light. That light, the same one that shone from the empty tomb, the same one that lit up John's cave on Patmos, never went out. It passed from heart to heart, voice to voice, across ages and oceans, until it reached even this moment now. You, listening, remembering, because the story of the 12 was never about their deaths. It was about what lived after them. Some say that when the wind moves softly through old churches, it sounds like footsteps, quiet, steady, as if the 12 still walk unseen. Others believe that when someone prays with true faith, they stand among them, part of the same unbroken line of belief that began 2,000 years ago. In Rome, beneath ancient stones, pilgrims light candles at Peter's tomb, tears in their eyes. In India, under the shade of old trees, locals still speak the name of Thomas, the stranger who brought light. In Greece, ruins whisper Philip's last words. Now I see the Father. The empire that tried to silence them is gone, but their names remain carved into the soul of humanity. Even those who don't believe know their story, a story too powerful to vanish, too full of love to be forgotten. And somewhere, beyond time itself, maybe the 12 are together again, walking along a shore that never ends. The sea glows golden, the air filled with peace. The teacher stands among them, smiling. Peter laughs like a child. John leans close to him. Thomas kneels, whispering his old words. My Lord, my God. They are home at last, back on earth. The boy in the small church looks up at the preacher once more. Do you think they know we still talk about them? He asks. The old man smiles. Oh yes, he says. They know. Every time you choose love over hate, every time you forgive when you could have turned away, they're watching. Because that's the legacy they left us. Not fear, not sorrow, but love. The candles flicker again, their flames dancing gently in the still air. One by one, they seem to glow brighter, as if 12 unseen hands shield them from the wind. And for a moment, the church feels full not with people but with presence. The kind of presence that makes you forget the noise of the world and remember why faith exists. Outside, night falls, quiet and endless. The stars come out, 12 of them shining brighter than the rest. And somewhere beyond the sky, the 12 who once walked the earth still walk together, their light guiding every heart that dares to believe.